Do you want to know how to sell vintage on Etsy? Are you already an Etsy vintage seller? Vintage and Etsy vintage sellers are sorely represented on YouTube and in the Etsy marketplace in terms of support, in terms of guidance and information. And this video is all about vintage. I'm going to use an Etsy vintage store. It's fairly low key so far in terms of performance. I'm going to go through this store in a review with you so that if you're a vintage seller or you're about to become a vintage seller, you can really learn some important facts from me about what makes vintage stores tick on Etsy and how you get to decent levels of sales. This store's perfect to do it. Let's go through it together. Loads of interesting stuff to talk about. Let's get into it. So here we are in Elise Heaven Designs. This is a vintage store. It's been around since 2020. So the first thing we're doing is we're having a high level look at the store. What's the overall picture? And straight away, we're missing a seller icon here. So Elisa needs to fill that in. It looks really unprofessional to not have that filled in. And the banner behind is also missing. So these two things, they're only little details. You can fix these, in an hour or so, but it makes your shop look so much more professional, and these need to be filled in. So what's the overall story here with this vintage store? Clearly we can see if we order the prices from low to high, this is an expensive vintage store. It's the higher side of pricing for vintage, as we can see here, looking at these prices on page 1. Let's just move that back to custom. So high prices or higher prices, low inventory. So remember when I speak to you guys about how many items you should have in stock. We've got 58 items. That's a small number, especially for a vintage store which is going to have inventory related issues in terms of visibility. So people ask all the time, you'll see people in my comments, and I've done videos on this, what if I've only got one item? What if I've only got one item to sell? How do I make this work? How do I make more sales, more quality score if each item is unique? So I'm going to touch on that in a minute. So we've got 58 items. It's been open since 2020, but we've only got 39 sales. So the quality score, visibility profile of this store is low. It's been around for a while, but there's not much going on in terms of sales. So how do we sort this out? Vintage sellers, how do we sort this store out to make it more money, make it more sales, and get this store much more visible than it is before? I'm going to break out of this store view now to give you some really, really important information. So, if you're a vintage seller, here's the deal. If you're about to open a vintage store or you're already in Etsy selling vintage, you've got to understand a fundamental difference between your Etsy store to everybody else. And that is usually you have inventory volume problems. So for example, in the store that we're looking at now, if they've got a table or a chest of drawers, there's probably only one. And I'm sure most of you have this with vintage. You only get one or two of something. And what most vintage sellers do, they put that into their Etsy store. So you put the item into your store, it sells, and then the inventory is gone. So you've made the sale from the item, but the item doesn't exist in your store anymore to be sold again to bring more visibility in for that item and for your store. This is an Achilles heel for vintage sellers. This is how you solve it. Please listen to me. This will help you get more sales. I teach this to vintage sellers all the time. It's vital. Lots of vintage sellers have worked this out over the years, but most haven't. Okay, so when you go out sourcing your vintage products, be it teacups, chest of drawers, clothing, don't just go looking for the item and pick it up and buy it. Go looking for pipelines or supplies of items. So if you go looking for teacups, don't just go looking for, a set of 4 cups and saucers. See if you can get similar items in the future so that you can put that listing back into stock when it's sold. Now, let me be clear, these items won't be exactly the same. So if you've got floral teacups, as an example, you'll sell the first one or the first set. You'll have another set that's similar. It's not the same, but it doesn't need to be the same. As soon as the first set sells, renew that listing that's sold, change the photos, change the description, change the price, any SEO changes, do that, publish it as soon as you can. What you're doing then is holding on to some of the quality score that you got from the sale of the original teacup. If you don't do this, if you just keep putting an item into your store, selling it, not restocking it, putting another item into your store, you are never building sales velocity and quality score in your vintage store. This is the number one killer for vintage stores. This tip is essential for you to make money. So make sure you build pipelines or streams of products. So you might have tablecloths, teacups, chest of drawers, bowls, plates, whatever it is that you're selling. Go with the mindset to build up a catalogue of similar products in your inventory that you can then put back into your store quickly on each item as it sells. I absolutely guarantee you this is going to make you more sales by doing it. Let me know in the comments if you do this, by the way. I'll be interested to know if you already do this. This is such a good technique. Let's get back into this store. Let's see what else this store can do to make more sales, and perhaps what you can also do in your vintage store to make more sales.
So back in the store, and it is a lovely store. We've got lots of lovely items in this store. Something straight away we need to understand is that if the pricing starts at 211 euros, we are going to see a slower velocity of sale inside this store. So first of all, I talked about the items and replacing the dead items in the store with new ones. So items that have sold, get new items in. Now we have to look at price. So if you want to build a vintage store and make hundreds or thousands of sales sooner rather than later, you've got to get in under $100 price point. Okay, it doesn't mean you can't sell $270 chairs or $470 bedside tables. You can, but what is critical for vintage stores is that you start to rack up and collect sales as quickly as possible. The easiest way to do this is offering sub $100 price point items. It doesn't mean you lower your profit margin. It means you go and source small items that will be in demand that naturally have a lower original price point, so that you can put your markup on that item and then make more sales, because the buyers, the customers, will much more easily purchase a $50 item as opposed to a $250 item. It's a big gap. So our goal, let's get lower priced items into the store that will sell more readily. Remember the pipeline as well. Get more products of the same type so that you can relist it, collect quality score, and build sales velocity and revenue. Absolutely critical this is. Doesn't mean you can't sell $500 items, you can, but they just don't sell that quickly. Sub $100 items will sell much more quickly. Let's move on to the next point that I've got to make with this store.
Right, the next problem we've got with this vintage store is a photography video problem. So vintage is one of the most important niches for photography and video. You've got to get this right because every view really does count. We want to maximize conversions on everything you sell, raise the visibility of your vintage store. So let's have a dive into the photography and video. I'll show you what's going on here, how to fix it, and this will help this store make more sales, and it will help you make more sales. Let's get into this.
So photography and video, so many people struggle with this. I know it's not easy. It takes time to get good at photography. And the overall level of photography in this store isn't bad. It's not bad, but it definitely needs work. So first of all, let's look at context. So Etsy, as most of you guys now know, they changed the sizing of the photos to square. So if you had rectangle photos, you're now getting objects cut off in your photo slots. So the first thing this seller's got to do is go through and sort out the photos so that the sides of products and maybe the tops of products are not cut off in the shot. We want the whole product in the shot like this. This is great, this one here, you see? You've got the whole chest of drawers. This one, you've got the left and right side cut off. This one, the ends are cut off. It looks unprofessional and doesn't allow the customer to see the whole product. So very, very important, get everything in the shot. Next thing, when you look at your photography, we want the context between the object and the background to be right. So what I mean by that is, let's not have objects for sale too far away. This chair is way too far away. Let's not have too many props like this chair here. I'll just zoom in a bit. We've got wall items, we've got a plant, we've got a wicker basket. It's very, very busy, and it takes people's attention, the potential customer, away from the focal point. This is much better. This table here, that's a much better shot because it's got contrast between the object and the background. Okay, they've got a plant on the table as a prop, but this is way better. Less busy, simple. We know we're buying a table. So we've got varying quality in these photos. Some of them are better than others. When we've got lots of objects in with the items for sale, it's not good. It's going to confuse people. So let's clean up and make this photography much more simple. Now, this is an essential tip. Next, video. This is going to make you more sales. Every product needs a product video. So because you've got access to your stock, you're not selling print on demand. This is your stuff. You're selling it. Vintage buyers are absolutely going to want to see photos of videos of a 272 euro chair. Okay, so make sure all of you selling vintage put in videos of the items as well as photos. Yes, it takes more time, but I absolutely guarantee you're going to make more sales. No doubt about it. So, photography and video, it's never more critical than for a vintage store. Let's back up now. I'm going to give you my final conclusions on this store and an essential piece of advice for this store to make more money. Let's get into that now.
So, my final piece of advice for this vintage store, and probably for lots of you out there as well selling vintage, this store needs to grow in size. 58 items is way, way too small. If you want to make more sales, get more sales velocity, get more revenue, this store has got to go up to 100 items, beyond 100 items, 150, 200, 250, 300. Get into that area and the sales will be coming in much more regularly. And remember what I said, you've got to build pipelines of inventory to do this, so that not only are you growing the store, but when you sell an item, more similar items can be loaded back in to keep hold of that quality score and raise your visibility and make more sales. So I hope you've enjoyed this vintage store review. Do you sell vintage? Get into my comments. Tell me how it's going. Are you doing well? Are you doing badly? Talk to me in the comments. Any questions about vintage? Anything about what I've talked about today? Get into the comments and let me know. And if you want to work with me, in the description are links to work with me. I start with calls for 5 minutes for $25. No excuse. Get involved. Let's work together and improve your Etsy store. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. See ya.